When 14-year-old Eliza Davis meets a fellow domestic abuse victim, their world of suffering transforms into a haven of shared secrets. They discover that their path to freedom is wrought with misery, along with a sacrifice that one of them must endure. In the remote, tranquil town of Greenburg, Kansas, dwelled a young girl named Eliza. She was a bright and talented 14-year-old with golden curls cascading down her back and eyes as blue as the clearest sky. Eliza was an artist by heart, and her fingertips seemed to possess a magic that could bring any canvas to light. However, despite her abundant talents, Eliza's life was far from perfect. Eliza's mother, Amelia, was a frail, ethereal woman who was once a celebrated ballerina. Her once graceful movements were now marred by the weight of her own sadness. Her once radiant face, framed by soft chestnut curls, now bore the telltale signs of years spent in sorrow. Amelia was a woman whose dreams had been crushed, leaving her a mere shadow of her former self. Her father, Thomas, was a brooding, imposing figure who ruled their household with an iron fist. His broad shoulders and sharp, piercing eyes were matched only by his seemingly insatiable need for control. Once a promising lawyer, he had succumbed to the allure of power and the dark world of crime, forever tainting his life and the lives of his family. Eliza's older brother, Edward, was a complex and enigmatic young man. At 20, he had already established himself as an influential presence in their father's criminal empire. Despite his outwardly cold demeanor and dark, penetrating gaze, Edward harbored a deep love for his sister and would do anything to protect her from her father's wrath. Within the walls of their grand but crumbling home, Eliza and her family were trapped in a constant cycle of fear and abuse. Thomas's temper was as volatile as it was unpredictable, and even the smallest perceived slight could unleash a torrent of violence for everyone in its path. Despite the darkness that surrounded her, Eliza found solace in her art. She spent hours locked away in her room, her delicate fingers working tirelessly as she poured her emotions onto the canvas. Through her paintings, she created a world of her own, a place where the sun always shone and the weight of her family's troubles could not touch her. One day, as Eliza was exploring the nearby woods, she stumbled upon a hidden grove that seemed untouched by the passage of time. The sunlight streamed through the trees, casting a warm golden glow over the soft carpet of wildflowers that blanketed the ground. It was here that Eliza found her sanctuary, a place where she could escape from the turmoil of her home and lose herself in the beauty of nature. As the months passed, Eliza's refuge became her lifeline. She would spend hours in the grove, painting scenes of breathtaking beauty and taking solace in the healing power of her art. It was during one of these peaceful afternoons that Eliza met Lily, a kind-hearted girl her age who shared her passion for art and the natural world. Lily's family lived in a small cottage on the outskirts of town, and despite their modest means, they radiated love and warmth. Her mother, a gentle woman with soft, kind eyes, was a skilled herbalist who dedicated her life to helping others. Lily's father, a robust and jovial man with a booming laugh, worked tirelessly to provide for his family and ensure their happiness. As the friendship between Eliza and Lily blossomed, they spent countless hours together in the hidden grove, painting, laughing, and sharing their deepest thoughts and dreams. Eliza found solace in Lily's presence, and for the first time in her life, experienced the warmth and joy of a true friendship. One afternoon, as the two girls sat by the edge of the stream, Eliza noticed several thin, jagged scars tracing their way up Lily's arms. A heavy silence settled over them as Eliza gently traced the lines with her fingertips. She looked into Lily's eyes, which now shimmered with unshed tears. Lily hesitated, her voice barely a whisper, as she confessed her own dark secret. Her father, though loving and kind to the rest of the family, had a hidden side that only Lily knew. He had a weakness for alcohol, and when he drank, he became a different person. It was in those moments that Lily bore the brunt of his rage, her body a canvas for his twisted art. Eliza's heart ached for her friend, and in that moment they forged a bond deeper than either could have imagined. They vowed to be each other's support, to help one another through the darkness and find a way to escape the cycle of abuse that haunted them both. Unbeknownst to the girls, a dangerous undercurrent was brewing in the shadows. Thomas had become increasingly threatened by the success of Lily's father, who had expanded his herbalist business to include a profitable line of natural remedies. As the competition between them grew, Thomas's already unstable temperament took a turn for the worst. One evening, after Eliza had spent the day with Lily, she arrived home to find her father waiting for her in the living room. His eyes were cold and his face was twisted with anger. "Where have you been?" Thomas demanded, his voice like ice. "I was out with Lily," Eliza replied hesitantly, trying to gauge her father's mood. Thomas scoffed. "You think that girl is your friend? You're just as weak and pathetic as your mother. You'll never have a true friend." Eliza tried to hold back her tears, but her voice wavered as she responded. "She is my friend, and she's kind to me, unlike you." Thomas's face turned red with rage, and he struck Eliza across the face, sending her sprawling to the floor. "You ungrateful brat," he seethed. "I provide everything for you, and you have the audacity to talk back to me? I won't have you gallivanting around town with that girl, especially when her father is trying to undermine my business." As Eliza lay on the floor, cradling her cheek, she realized that the friendship she treasured with Lily had become entangled in a dangerous web of rivalry. She knew that their lives were about to take a dark and unexpected turn. One fateful evening, driven by his insatiable need for control, Thomas decided to eliminate his rival once and for all. He enlisted the help of his son Edward, who had become an adept enforcer in his father's criminal empire. Reluctantly, Edward agreed, though his heart was heavy with the knowledge of what they were about to do. The night was dark and moonless as Thomas and Edward approached the modest cottage. Thomas, with a twisted grin, turned to his son and whispered, "Remember, Edward, we're here to send a message. We're going to destroy that man's livelihood, just like he's trying to destroy ours." Edward, his voice meek and cold, replied, "Dad, I don't think this is right. Can't we find another way to deal with the competition? We don't have to do this." Thomas glared at his son, his eyes filled with rage. "You spineless coward," he hissed before striking Edward across the face with a swift slap. "You will do as I say. Now help me with this." With tears in his eyes and a bruise forming on his cheek, Edward reluctantly followed his father's orders, knowing that he couldn't defy him without facing even harsher consequences. Meanwhile, inside the cottage, Lily's father was pacing back and forth, his face contorted in anger. The sound of his footsteps and muffled shouts gave a chilling indication of the tension within the household. It wasn't difficult to imagine the possibility that Lily too faced her own battle behind closed doors. Thomas's face contorted with rage as he pounded on the front door, bellowing Lily's father's name. The door creaked open, and Lily's father appeared, his face flushed and angry. But his expression quickly turned to fear upon seeing Thomas standing there. "You think you can steal my customers and destroy my business? And I'll just let it go?" Thomas spat at him, his voice shaking with rage. Lily's father stammered, trying to defend himself. I didn't. I'm just trying to make an honest living." Thomas sneered. "An honest living? Is that what you call it? Riding on my coattails? Taking what's rightfully mine? And don't even get me started on that good-for-nothing wife of yours. She's worse scum than my own wife." Lily's father clenched his fists, anger flaring in his eyes. "Don't you dare talk about my family like that." As Thomas and Lily's father continued to argue, Edward felt detached from the heated exchange. His eyes wandered into the depths of the house, and there in the dimly lit room behind Lily's father, he saw Lily. Her eyes were red from crying, and her arms were hidden beneath long sleeves, but something in her posture hinted at a deeper pain. As Edward's gaze lingered on Lily, he couldn't help but feel a knot forming in his stomach. It was clear that she, like Eliza, was trapped in a situation beyond her control. And he felt powerless to do anything about it. The sorrow and the helplessness gnawing at him seemed to intensify, making it difficult for him to breathe. The argument between Thomas and Lily's father escalated as Thomas pulled out a gun and pointed it at the terrified man. "You think you can just walk all over me?" Thomas snarled. "I'll show you what happens to people who mess with me and my family." Meanwhile, Eliza had heard the commotion from a distance and had cautiously approached the scene. Hidden behind a bush, she held her breath as she watched her father point a gun at Lily's father. She felt her own heart race, knowing that Lily was inside the house and that her father's actions could shatter the fragile bond that had formed between them. As the tension between the two men continued to rise, Edward and Eliza, unbeknownst to each other, both prayed silently for a peaceful resolution to the conflict. They knew that the consequences of their father's actions would affect everyone but themselves. A sinister smirk carved its way onto Thomas's face as he aimed the gun squarely at Lily's father. "Goodbye," he snarled, his voice echoing in the eerie silence of the night. Time seemed to stretch out into an endless chasm in the split second that followed. The gunshot, loud and horrifying, ripped through the night. The world spun around and Edward collapsed. Edward, who had positioned himself between his father and Lily's, crumpled to the ground, his life slipping away in an instant. As his eyes began to close, he caught a glimpse of the figure, Lily's father, a look of shock and horror etched upon his face. Thomas stood aghast, the smoking gun slipping from his trembling hands. Edward's sacrifice had been both unexpected and swift, and it left a chilling silence in its wake. In the chaos that followed, Thomas fled, leaving Lily's father to face the consequences of his actions. The families were shattered by the devastating events, their lives forever altered by the threads of fate that had woven them together. In the house, Lily stood in the doorway, her form barely discernible in the darkness. Her eyes, wide with shock and terror, met Eliza's across the room. there was a mutual understanding, a shared heartache that passed between them in that fleeting moment. Eliza felt a lump in her throat, her heart heavy with the weight of what had just transpired. Slowly, she walked over to where Edward lay, his body still and lifeless on the cold, hard ground. She fell to her knees beside him, her eyes welling up with tears that she couldn't hold back. Her hands, shaking, reached out to grasp his, now cold to the touch. The reality of the situation washed over her like a tidal wave, threatening to pull her under. "Edward," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the deafening silence that had enveloped the room. Her heart ached with a raw, unbearable pain as she clung onto his lifeless hand, her tears falling like raindrops onto the cold stone floor beneath them. Years passed, the world around them shifting and changing, but the memory of that fateful night never faded. Edward's death had sent ripples throughout the small community, and in the aftermath, Thomas disappeared, leaving a trail of whispered rumors and speculation in his wake. Without the oppressive presence of her father, Eliza found herself free to pursue her passion. She blossomed into a successful painter, her artwork capturing the beauty and raw emotion of the world around her. Her paintings were a symphony of colors, each stroke a testament to her resilience and strength. She had a studio now, filled with canvases and the smell of oil paint, a sanctuary where she could pour her heart and soul into every piece. And yet, beneath the surface of her success and happiness, there was a lingering sadness that clung to her like a shadow. Every time she picked up a paintbrush, she was reminded of the cost of her freedom. The price she had paid in blood and tears. Her heart ached for Edward, for the life he could have had, for the life they could have had together. Lily, too, had found her own path. Despite the trauma she had endured, she took over her father's herbalist shop, transforming it into a haven for those seeking natural remedies. Her soft-spoken and compassionate heart made her a beloved figure in the community, and her shop thrived. In the quiet moments of their lives, when the weight of their past threatened to pull them under, they found solace in each other. Their shared experiences, their shared loss, bound them together in a way that nothing else could. In their own way, they were survivors, carrying the scars of their past as badges of their resilience.